Sevgili seyirciler, bu hafta değişik bir program yapacağız. Programımızın tamamını bir röportaja ayıracağız. Bir kitap röportajı. Kitap çok önemli bir kitap. Hearts and Minds. Sayın Vincent Parillo. Aynı zamanda şu an Peterson Üniversitesi'nde halihazırda sosyoloji bölümünde profesörlük yapıyor. Yanında beraber çalıştığı Mahmut Ansari. Bu da İran asıllı, İranlı bir Amerikalı. Tahran Üniversitesi'nden mezun olmuş, New York Üniversitesi'nde görev yapmış ve bu insanlar oturmuşlar, Türk okulları nedir, ne değildir, dünyaya vereceği bir şey var mıdır, dünyanın buradan alacağı bir şey var mıdır? Bununla ilgili bilimsel, sosyolojik bir kitap yazmak istemişler. Ben kitabı şahsen aldım, okudum, fevkalade buldum. Neden? Çünkü kitap bir propaganda amacıyla yazılmış bir kitap değil. Sosyolojinin research metot dediğimiz araştırma metotlarını, o metotların bilimsel kalıplarını ortaya koyarak bir araştırma yapmışlar. Araştırma yaptıkları yerler neresi sevgili seyirciler? Bosna Hersek, Arnavutluk, Kazakistan, Romanya, Polonya, Kanada ve Amerika Birleşik Devletleri. Türkiye'ye gelmişler, Türkiye'de araştırma yapmak istemişler. Fakat Türkiye'de yaşanan son olaylardan sonra Türkiye'ye gidip o okulları inceleme imkanı bulamamışlar. Onu da hayretle karşılıyorlar. Yani böyle bir okul sisteminin barbarca yok edilmesinin ne kadar yanlış olduğu üzerinde de duruyorlar. Ama esas üzerinde durulacak şey bir dış gözle, hani buna bilimsel araştırmalarda outsider diyorlar, bir dış gözle insanların burayı gözlem yapması. Ben şahsen okurken bazen ol mahiler ki derya içredir, deryayı bilmezler sözünü hatırladım. Sizin için de çok ufuk açacağını düşünüyorum. Bir bilim adamının, bir sosyal bilimcinin hiçbir ön yargı gözetmeksizin ve bütün ön yargıları da elinin tersiyle iterek, bütün propagandaları elinin tersiyle iterek bilimsel metotlarla seçtiği öğrencilerden, öğretmenlerden, öğrenci velilerinden ve bu okullara finansal olarak yardımcı olan hayırsever insanlardan yaptıkları bilimsel araştırma metotlarıyla ortaya koydukları sonuçları kitap haline getirmişler. Ben şahsen çok faydalı olacağını düşünüyorum. O yüzden Vincent Parillo'nun yazdığı bu eseri huzurlarınıza sunuyorum. Bu kitabı bir tarafsız gözle alıp okumak, en azından yazarından dinlemekte fayda görüyorum. O yüzden sizi Sayın Vincent Parillo ile baş başa bırakırım. Ne ummuş, ne bulmuş, ne görmüş, ne işitmiş, hangi bilimsel tespitlere dayanmış yaptığı çalışmalar, hep beraber izleyelim. First of all, thank you so much for accepting our request.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Maybe you can introduce yourself for our readers and audience.
Well, yes, my name is Vince Parillo, and I'm a professor of sociology here locally at William Patterson University. And I wear a few hats. I'm a professor, I'm an author of a number of different books, and I also am a filmmaker. I make a number of films for PBS on the city of Patterson. It's been a long journey and a happy one.
Wonderful. Let's talk about the title of the book.
Okay.
Why do you choose the Hearts and Minds, for the book?
Hearts and Minds is an expression that was used way back in the 1960s when the United States was involved in the Vietnam War. But that had no bearing whatsoever on my picking it. As I went from school to school in the different countries, and I was trying to find out what motivated teachers to be in the schools, what they were trying to do, and when I was talking to the students, asking them about their experiences, many times I heard one of them say to me, Hearts and Minds. My favorite one was perhaps of a young man who was in Albania, and he said, this school is very good. They educate me here, and that is good, but they educate me here too. So he did not use the term Hearts and Minds, but his gestures indicated it, and others did. And then the more I thought about it, and since I'm an educator myself, I taught high school English, and I've observed a number of school systems as a consultant. And it just occurred to me that what the schools were so successful in was educating the whole person, not just for knowledge, not just for intellectual gain. And I thought this title captured best of all the theme of what the book would be.
Wonderful. Thank you. As you said, you are not a member of the zmet movement.
No.
And you are a professor and you focus on some Turkish schools. And I want to ask a question, simple and clear question. What did you accept before starting your research, and what did you find?
I have to back it up one square, if I may. As a professor, my entire career has been on teaching about intergroup relations, on conflict resolution, on what was the evil of prejudice and how subtle discrimination could be, as well as obvious. So when I became acquainted through some meetings of people and a couple of conferences, I became more curious. I became intellectually curious as to what was happening. And so what my goal was to look at these schools. Now, as sociologists, what we do is we're outsiders doing an objective study of what is working and what is not. And it occurred to me that other religions have been influenced by culture. Judaism or Catholicism, for example, are very different in the United States than they are in the Middle East or in Europe. And so I was wondering, with these schools with a common mission of educating hearts and minds, how did the culture impact? How did that change anything, or didn't it? And so what I was interested in was going to different kinds of countries with different histories, with different demographics. I wanted to go to countries that had problems, such as Bosnia, which of course, went through serious religious purging. Clergy of all religions were killed. They tried to make it an atheistic nation. So religion was suppressed there, as it was in Albania and Bosnia. So what you had was violence, repression, and now later, what were the schools doing? How were they succeeding? I knew they stepped into a vacuum with the breakdown of the Soviet Union. But what I was more interested in was, how would those schools do where the Muslims were a minority, such as in Poland or in Romania, Christian countries? What would be the differences? Was there any? I was interested in Kazakhstan because Islam as practiced, the tenets are the same. The religion is the basics, the values and the teachings of the Prophet. But it's a different form of Islam expressed there by people's clothing, and some countries are more religious than others. So it was primarily, that's what I was looking for. What were the cultural impacts upon these different schools in achieving their missions? The second part of the question was, what did I find?
Yeah.
I found that the more I learned, the more I wanted to learn. It was fascinating to me what I was encountering. I have done many studies. I have worked with oppressed peoples, with the Roma, the Gypsies in Italy, not in Italy, in Central Europe, for the State Department. I have dealt with minority people all my life. And the positive comments and energy were so important that I needed to find more. So what I found, to put it as simply in as short way as I can, is that I found that there was a consistency through all of the schools in making women, speaking to me, more self-confident, in making parents recognize their children were changing and becoming more open-minded, becoming friends with people of different faiths, that the opening of the heart was really happening. All of the schools were state-of-the-art. They had smart boards, they had excellent equipment, great facilities. But a school building is nothing without the people in it, and what are they doing as teachers? And so time and again what I was finding was very positive results.
Could you tell us something about your research methods
That's a very good question, and it's very important because you have to be very careful in the data you gather. When I was a very young man and computers were just starting out, one of the first lessons I learned about computer programming was garbage in, garbage out. So don't do that. So it's very important that one, you ask the right kinds of questions. You don't ask questions where you're leading the person to give you a certain answer because they think that's what you want to hear. You don't ask trick questions. You ask questions that put the person at ease. But it's not just the questions. What we did before we started out, every university has what's known as an institutional review board. Before you do your research, it has to be reviewed for its objectivity, for its not taking advantage of vulnerable subjects, people. So we went through a very serious approval chain, which I used to ensure the educators I was with what we were trying to do. You also have to be very careful about who you ask the questions of. By that I mean, objectively, you try to do what is called a systematized random sampling. We would pick who we wanted to interview. We would not ask the principal, for example, to send us 5 students. Mm-hmm. Those could be hand-picked favorites who would just, tote the party line or what have you. So we would pick every 3rd student or every 4th. When we were interviewing parents, they were coming to pick up their children. We would go to every 3rd one, and many times we had to use an interpreter, of course, to ask for permissions. But that's what we did. We were doing random selections to be sure that we were getting honest answers. The third part of the interview questions is you have to put that person you're talking to at ease. You have to assure them you're not going to use their name. They will be completely anonymous, that everything they say will just be reported in general descriptive terms, not in anything where they can be identified, because you want them to be comfortable to tell you what they really feel. That's very important. Otherwise, I do have garbage in. And this was not supposed to be a propaganda piece. This was an objective scientific study to actually find out not only what was going on, but how it was being received. So we talked to students, we talked to teachers, administrators. We also talked to businessmen and the parents, as I said.
As far as I remember, you have interviewed nearly 300 people, right?
Easily.
Teachers, students, supporters, financial supporters, and some parents, right?
Yes, and parents were important. Yeah, we spent about 30 minutes with each person so that we could fulfill, sometimes a little bit shorter, sometimes a little bit longer, but on average we were 30 minutes talking to people.
You have mentioned some research papers and books and theses in your book, and you underline that your research is different. I can say your book is different than the others. Could you explain why?
Well, before you do any kind of investigation of any subject, as a sociologist, you need to know as much as you can before you start. You should not be naive, just seeing bright, shiny objects. And so what I did was I looked into a lot of research to see what has been written up until now, and what was written. So sometimes what was written was a case study of one school. Sometimes what was written by people within the movement who were trying to explain themselves in their school or whatever to the general readership. Sometimes there were people with an axe to grind, and so they went in looking for something negative. The reason our book was different was, one, we were objective. Two, we were outsiders. We were not publicists for the movement or for the schools. We wanted to get an honest look at what was going on. And the other element that made it so different from all others is no other book before ever went to so many different kinds of countries to do a comparative cultural examination of these schools. And what's important there too is it wasn't just going to different countries. We were in 3 continents. We were in Asia, we were in Europe, we were in North America. We were, as I said before, in countries that each had different histories. We had Canada and the United States, for example, are not religious countries, although religion is a part of our country. They're multicultural, heavy receivers of immigrants. So a much more diverse society here than in a mostly homogeneous place, let's say like Poland. So it was finding all these many different kinds of intervening variables and how did they impact on the schools. And yet you look for the common thread. What were the students saying in each of those places? What were the parents saying in each of those places? Well, that's what made the book unique.
Okay. I realize that you have used some special terms and concepts like mutual respect and understanding for students, and dedication for teachers, and generosity for businessmen who support these schools.
Yes.
What do you mean exactly?
Well, I think I can start to answer your question best by telling you one of the most wonderful things that I discovered in these schools was the bond that existed between the student and the teacher. Unlike anything I had ever experienced, even personally as a teacher myself for high school for 4 years, or in any of the consulting I did for other school systems. Because not only are these teachers, again, let me even back up a moment and say, no place is perfect.
Sure.
And there are always some weak teachers to be found in every school system. I think anyone listening to me has probably had the memory of at least one bad teacher that they had in school, if not more. I know I did. But what I found profound was these teachers in all these different countries, some of them were Turkish, many were in the movement, a good many were not. They were natives to that country, they were not part of the movement, but they were part of the spirit, the attitude, the environment, the culture of the school. And not only were they educating that whole person, which needs a whole explanation unto itself, but they were doing so in many different ways. Outside the classroom, in after-school activities, in informal tea sessions.
Tea sessions, yeah, you mentioned in the book, tea sessions.
Yes. But also in home visits in many of these countries, taking one's own family and visiting the family of a student, perhaps living 3 hours away or whatever. I had so many students, and again, it was cutting across all countries, would say, he's more than my teacher. He's like my big brother, or she is more than my teacher. We're like family. And we've heard this time and again. The students were also very clear in saying they know where the line is,
Yeah.
and will set us there. It wasn't that. It wasn't the melting of authority or respect, but it was the bond that was so tight. And that was one of the most beautiful things. And that's part of what I mean by mutual respect, as you asked your question. All right. But part of it is. There's an old musical from the United States called The King and I, and one of the first songs in that particular musical is by your students you'll be taught. And that requires a certain mindset. That requires a certain attitude to not be a dominating force in the classroom, but to learn from your students and to build this mutual respect, because you can learn a lot by not just teaching and reading and preparing, but by listening and interacting. And that was one of the more positive things I found consistent.
You have mentioned in the book and in your speech now, big brother, abi, or big sister, abla.
Yes.
What do you mean? What do you see that terms?
What do I mean by that? The term, as we mean it, doesn't mean size and it doesn't mean age. What it means is a guiding spirit, someone who helps you get through whatever it is you need to get through. There were many students, for example, in a number of these countries who were at boarding schools and talked about how they cried every night, how they got homesick, how they missed it. And then they talk about, because the schools are set up to allow the upperclassmen, the older students, to help the younger students. I mean, that's part of the process, part of the structure. And so what they do is it's someone you can lean on, it's someone you can count on, who will help you at that point. You're not alone. And that typically, when you're a little brother or a little sister, you look to your older member as you know, as a role model, as I want to be like her, I want to be like him, or what you don't know enough, so they tell you to help you through those passages, and that's what we were saying.
Do you know the big brother, Abi or Abla, big brothers and big sisters? Now is kind of labeled, Mr. Erdogan and his regime label them. Some people label some people and criminalize, and they say they are guilty because they are Abi or Abla.
Mm.
What's your reaction of this pressure on some Abis and Ablas?
Well, we talk about people who are optimists as seeing the world through rose-colored glasses, all right? In sociology, we use the term selective perception. You see what you want to see, not necessarily what is there to be seen, all right? It is so easy to criticize. It is so easy to tear down. It is such a challenge to build up. And you can take anything that is good and wear dark colored glasses and make it negative. That doesn't make it right. What we always say in my field is you consider the source. And if the source is saying this, that usually tells more about them than it does about what the subject is that was going to say.
You have mentioned that these schools, especially outside of Turkey, zmet schools are, you know, whatever they call them, can be a goodwill ambassador.
Yes.
But now, you know, the regime is trying to shut down all the schools. As an outsider, as a scientist and a sociologist, what do you feel? What do you think? How's your analysis? Why is just political? Or, I don't know. You know, I just want to know, what do you feel? What do you?
There's so many things I could say right now. Let me just start by, I knew going in, with my colleague Mahmoud Ansari, I knew going in that these schools were under criticism and attack. This is before the so-called coup. I knew there were criticisms about the schools having a secret political agenda and a secret religious agenda. I mean, that was part of the criticism already out there. So we looked for that with very quiet questioning of the students, doing the different kinds of ways of getting at that subject to discover that was a total lie. There was not a political or religious agenda. Religion, for the most part, is not taught in these schools. Comparative religion, yes, at an upper level, but religion's not taught. There was no political agenda. But the bigger question here, I think you're raising in my mind at least, is that these schools, as we found, were increasing openness, open-mindedness, self-confidence, a spirit of charity, of empathy, of generosity. So much good was being accomplished that when you shut down schools, you are cheating the very society these schools were helping. There have been friends of mine that I know were in prison. There were schools I visited that do not exist anymore. I'm aware of those. And I think it's a tremendous loss, because what you had here was something very positive happen. You have a powerful force for selfish reasons, perhaps not even explainable, that is stopping this. And who is being hurt? Certainly the people who've been unjustly put into prison. But even more than that, and that's terrible unto itself, but even more than that are the children who could be in these schools that have been shuttered. The children who could be developing those bonds that I talked about moments ago. These children who could be growing into young adults and people who could very much be contributing forces to society with a mindset for one's fellow man or woman. And so I think that's my reaction, is heartbreak, because it didn't have to happen. And whatever the motivation is, oftentimes many innocent people suffer because of the evil actions of others. And I think this is one of those cases.
The last question. As you know, many teachers, students, and businessmen who are supporting zmet schools are now in Europe, in Canada, in Australia, and in the United States, and they are trying to survive. Do you have any recommendation for them for integration, for doing something?
Oh, that's a very difficult question. I can say this, that with all of my research dealing with refugees and with immigrants, there's two things that come to my mind very quickly. One is you must adjust and adapt if you are to survive. But at the same time, there is a tremendous wellspring of courage within these people, because you lost what you had because of your values and your belief system. This is who you are, and you are paying a price because of who you are. You don't change who you are. Your values and your beliefs are still there. What you do is look upon the hardship, and it is. I don't want to minimize it. You need to sometimes learn a new language, or certainly the customs, find a way to have a life, a career. I mean, these are challenges, there's no question about it. But at the same time, it's an opportunity. If you deny me here, I still am me with my beliefs and thoughts. I will now share that here. And I just say it takes an inner strength, and that inner strength comes from your faith, your values, and your individual mission. And if you can get past, there's a social scientist called Maslow, and he talks about hierarchy of needs. And when you can deal with the basics and the food, shelter, and clothing, and I can adjust so that we are now okay in this new life, now the next step, and the next higher level, is back to what got me here in the first place. So I'm not really the person to give advice on something like that. You have to live it, experience it. But I think what it is keep strong. And I guess I usually, when I give a talk, I usually say, why did I write this book? You didn't ask me that. And I had two audiences in mind. The one audience I had in mind were people who knew nothing about the schools, knew nothing about zmet. And so many lies were told about them that I wanted the truth to be told. So that's one part of the book. The other book, part of the motivation, the audience was for people in the movement. Because all of us think we do the right thing. And if you're a teacher, you think you're doing well with your students. You think you're accomplishing something, and that's why you make the sacrifices for less of an income, more hours put in, and so forth, because you think you're doing good. And sometimes students will come back and tell you that. This book contains the voices of those students and of those parents who tell you how good a job is being done for them. And if there's anything in a way of advice that I might be able to give to the people being forced to start all over again, it would be read the book. Read it more than once. Find your passages there, because while we can certainly from our religious writings get inspiration, and we should, there's inspiration to be had here on a very practical nature of what you sacrificed and what you still can do, and take heart in that.
Thank you so much.
My
I
pleasure.
really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.